In the last video, we talked about bringing glory to God within the context of sport through our motivation. And we talked about how to use focal points as a way to remind ourselves in practice and in competition to realign motivation from wanting to make much of self to wanting to make much of God. And it's worth noting, coaches, you can do this too. You can utilize focal points. This last year, coaching 3rd and 4th grade football, this wristband was my focal point. It was a reminder to me every time I looked at it that there's greater wins available than what happens on the scoreboard. That coaching 3rd and 4th graders, I'm reminding myself, character matters, transformation matters. Yes, we're going to go after the win, but there's much greater wins available within sport. But doesn't God care about our external actions in sport too? If we're prioritizing our heart and motivation, does that mean we should not care about how we perform as a competitor at all? This is not an either-or mentality, it's both and. We can glorify God through being properly motivated and through pursuing our athletic best as competitors and coaching to the best of our ability. Colossians 3:23 and 24 shows us this connection between motivations and actions. Paul says that whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Whatever you do, he says, do it to the best of your ability, as if you're doing it for the Lord. That's the motivation. It's the why behind why we do what we do, but it's also the how as well. Do it as if God is your sole audience. Work, play, coach, eat, practice, whatever you do it for an audience of one. If God is our primary audience and sport offers an opportunity for us to bring him glory, what does this look like practically though? For starters, it probably means that we're bringing our best whenever we have the opportunity. It means we pursue excellence. It means we practice, we compete, and we coach to the absolute best of our ability, knowing that the effort we put in is in a very real sense a worship offering back to the Lord who gave us these very gifts. The beautiful part of this, again, is we don't have to be the absolute best athlete or coach during competition. We don't have to be the one who comes out with a win to bring glory to God. Because God's expectation is that we bring our best, not necessarily that we end up being the best. We see this in Mark 12. Jesus is watching people give their offerings, and the text is going to say that many rich people threw in these really large amounts of money. But a widow shows up, and she contributes 2 copper coins worth just a few cents. Jesus sees this, and he calls over his disciples. They kind of huddle up, and he says, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty." Jesus' message was simple. Our worship to the Lord requires we bring the best of what we have, not our best compared to other people. So that's the first part. Athletes and coaches, bring excellence. Pursue excellence in all we do in sport. Bring our absolute best. It's glorifying to God, but it also honors our opponent. There are plenty more ways to glorify God through our actions in sport, but in my opinion, these 2 stand out. The first is pursuing excellence. The second is noticing those on the margins in sport and showing them dignity and respect. Jesus was the master of this. Oftentimes, Jesus went against these expectations. He made time for children. He made time for women in a culture that didn't place a high value on either of those. He made time for the hungry. He made time for the sick and the demon-possessed and the tax collectors and the crippled and the blind, and hopefully you get the point. If Jesus is the radiance of God's glory, and we glorify God by aligning our life to look like God's Son, it means we need to make time for those in the margins in sport. So competitors, coaches, who comes to mind for you? Is it the person on your team who's injured? Is it the volunteer assistant coach who's just trying to learn? Is it the person at the end of the bench or the transfer who doesn't know anybody? What about the janitors and the administrative assistants and the maintenance workers responsible for keeping